accept my invitation.
No problem.
Thank you so much. So today we're going to have a YouTube video. I will ask you some questions, casual meeting. So yeah, don't worry. Okay. So first of all, can you say hello to Taiwan?
Actually, it's a beautiful place.
So last time you came is actually 2015, right? Six years ago. My God.
Yeah, something like that. And I just remember we went to coffee farms in Taiwan, which I really enjoyed.
Yes.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So thank you for your time. So today we're going to ask you several questions regarding roasting, as well as some questions to the far level. Thank you for your time. Okay.
Yeah, no problem. Looking forward.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So my first question is that we all know that Tim Wendelboe is renowned for its light roast coffee. Anyways, some people call it Nordic style roasting. So what exactly do you think your philosophy is? Can you share with us your philosophy of roasting?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna say some words that many people say, but
okay.
You know, when I started roasting, I didn't really know that much about it, to be honest. And I started roasting for espresso, and I went to Italy to learn about it. So in the early days, we had very long roast times. I remember the first kind of espresso blends that I made in 2003. We roasted the total roasting time was like 20 minutes.
Oh my gosh.
The coffee was roasted to second crack, and believe it or not, it tasted much better than the products we were using at the moment. So that was quite interesting. But when I opened my own cafe and started roasting, I had like a exporter. He came to visit, and he had brought some samples of Ethiopian coffee. And then he suggested that we tasted it blind with my Ethiopian coffee on the table to see, which was better. And out of all the coffees on that table, there was one that I really disliked, and that was my own. And the reason why I disliked it was because it was so dark roasted. All I could taste was the roast. I couldn't really taste that it was an Ethiopian coffee. And that was because he had put on coffees that were very lightly roasted, and they were full of flavor. So when I kind of discovered this, we started experimenting with pushing the roast degree on our own coffees, and we just went lighter and lighter. And I believe the context was we were perceived when we started as being quite light roast coffee, but everything is in relation to what's already existing in the market. So our reference coffees were other roasteries in Norway and the US, and they were all dark. And just the fact that we were slightly lighter meant that we were perceived as being light. But when we started pushing it even lighter, it became extremely light in comparison to what was in the market. And then I kind of developed an understanding over years of what kind of flavors were actually in the green coffee before I even kind of roasted it. So our philosophy, to answer your question, is we want to kind of showcase the coffee's true flavor. So when you drink the coffee, you should be able to taste what coffee variety it is, hopefully also where it's from, and also how it was processed, because that's what I find interesting when I drink coffee. And we want as little kind of influence or negative influence from the roast, so to say. So that means if it's too light, of course, you're only going to taste the flavor of dried grass or dried hay or something like that. And of course, if it's too dark, you will only taste flavors of like burnt and charcoal and ash. So we want kind of the ingredients to shine, and that's kind of the philosophy, because we put a lot of work into working with producers, making sure we separate coffees on varieties, on picking dates, on different processes, and we want this unique product to really shine when you drink it, and not to kind of cover it up with a bad roast, so to say.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, so following your philosophy of roast, would you kindly give some roasters in Taiwan some advices as to how to roast, like just what you said, roast to the flavor, not really to the, it tastes like a roasted flavor. Do you have any advices that you can give us, like ROR or any roast time?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't really look at rate of rise curves as much. I mean, the same data you can look at in a normal temperature curve. So I'm not so hung up on rate of rise and temperatures, because a good example is we have our roaster, the Loring roaster, and we just changed the thermocouple for our bean probe, because it was starting to get worn out. So we had to change it. And when we changed it, all the temperature curves jumped with a couple of degrees. Okay. So that means what we used to measure as 205 degrees now was 207 degrees.
Yeah.
And also the probe placement, how thick it is, it varies so greatly from roaster to roaster. So we cannot really discuss, I think, rate of rise curves or temperature curves or temperatures in general, because it's so individual for each roaster, how they're set up. And even if especially if you have a drum roaster, like I used to have an old Probat, and when we moved that roaster to a new location, because we sold the roaster, and the people who bought the roaster, they were trying to follow our old profiles, but that was impossible. And that was because the chimney was much longer, the airflow was different, everything was different. So even with the same machine, with the same probes and everything, it had different readings when it was set up differently.
Yeah.
So for me to give good advice on how to roast the way that we roast, which is quite light, but with I think good development and good kind of fruity and acidic flavors. We know that to achieve this, you need to roast quite fast, and also fast development time. And by development time, I mean from first crack to the coffee is done. And what's fast depending on batch size and the total time, of course, but we know by research that the development time is important. So the longer you kind of stretch out the development time, the kind of more roastiness and kind of less acidic you will have the coffee. And the shorter and faster you will have more fruity coffees. That's of course if the coffee is already fruity, but you will kind of enhance acidity and fruitiness with this shorter development time. And of course, if it's too short, the coffee will taste unroasted or not developed. And also total time, I think, at least if you're doing a light roast, it's important to really develop the coffee well. And the only way to do that is to put a lot of energy in from the start, so that you really get the steam pressure inside the beans as high as possible, so that you have good first crack, so that the cell structure breaks down and you can start to develop the coffee and also get good extraction. So I would say pay attention to total time and development time. Try to speed it up. If it's too fast, of course, you're also going to get some green flavors. If it's too slow, you're going to get some flat tasting coffees. And then the best investment you can have is to get a good color measurement device and measure color, because a lot of times when people play around with the roasting experiments, they forget to measure the color. And let's say you wanted to change the airflow, for instance, and you keep everything else the same. Well, you actually don't when you change the airflow, because how the beans absorb heat will also change when you change the airflow.
Right.
So if you don't roast to the same degree of color, then you don't really know what effect that airflow had.
Okay.
So we know that measuring color is extremely important. Probably around 80% of coffee flavor is, or how the kind of roast balance is determined by the roast color. So that's very, very important.
But to talk about the color, you put more emphasis on the color of the bean or the color of the grounds, or both? Measure the delta T?
We actually only measure ground coffee.
Okay.
And that's basically because when you measure the beans, especially if you have washed coffees, which is normally what we're roasting, you have that kind of white line in the middle, which is the silver skin or the chaff.
Yeah.
And I don't think you get very good readings from measuring the whole bean. It doesn't hurt to measure the whole bean and then also do the ground. I think, if you can get some more information out of that, fine. But I believe if you grind quite fine, you get a very good measurement and consistent measurements. That's what's important.
You're talking about the fineness. How fine would you grind in terms of measuring the color?
We ground to almost like espresso ground. We use, of course, a bag grinder. So we use a Ditting 804 grinder for it, but it's on the almost the finest setting.
Okay. So the next question is, do you ever think about having a dark roast in your coffee shop?
Not really. It's difficult for us to sell something that we don't like ourselves. And when even our staff there, when I do training with them, we also taste like coffees that are roasted differently. And when you work with our coffees for a while, you tend to kind of enjoy very light roasts and not enjoy a very dark roast. So that's why we would never, I don't think we would start selling that. There's nothing wrong in doing it. There's nothing wrong in doing it. And there's a lot of people who like darker roasts, but for us, it's not an option. I think we are known for a style and that's what we're going to stick to, I think.
So we just talked about the variety of coffee. So what do you think the role of coffee variety, in the farm level as well as in the coffee shop? How much should we pay attention to the variety of coffees?
Well, I believe we need to pay a lot of attention to it. First of all, at farm level, it's extremely important because let's say I'm working with a farm in Colombia now, Finca Tamana, and I just cut coffees yesterday actually, where we have started to plant many different types of varieties.
Okay.
And the reason why we do that is in order to see if we can get the quality higher. He has a pretty good standard coffee, but we know that there is potential for better coffee in his area. So we planted, I think now, above 20 different varieties there. And some of them are tasting really, really good.
Wow.
The problem with it is that a lot of the extremely good tasting ones are also susceptible to leaf rust and to other different diseases. Yeah. And we see that in Colombia and all over the world, actually, that they are getting more and more problems with coffee leaf rust, different pests and diseases that they didn't used to have. And the reason why they're getting it now is because the climate is changing. It's more moist, it's more humid, it's hotter.
Yeah.
So they also need to try varieties that are resistant, and there are organizations that are working on developing coffee varieties that are resistant to leaf rust. Cafe in Colombia, for instance, you have World Coffee Research. And I believe as a farmer, it's important to have a mix of varieties that are resistant, but maybe also have some that are not, and that have very, very high quality potential, so that you can diversify your sales strategy a little bit. So, for instance, I don't want to travel around Colombia and just look for the best coffee year after year after year. I would rather work with one producer and make him diversify by planting different varieties so that I can get different flavors from the same coffee farm.
Okay, so what you're saying is that so like farmers like the one that you work with, they have like ongoing process of introducing new varieties?
Yes.
Wow.
So I work with different farmers now, but in Honduras we are buying from 2 different farmers, and we started planting new varieties with them almost 8 years ago, and we are getting some of them now that are tasting really, really good, and some of them are not tasting so good. So then you're kind of changing to other varieties to see if that works. So we always start very small, it's maybe you'll start with 1,000 trees, and then or maybe less, and then after 4 or 5 years you can see if there is good potential in terms of flavor, because then you've been able to taste it maybe 2 or 3 times. And you also have to see if it's producing well, and if it kind of fits into their farm and their environment, and if it's tasting good and it's producing okay, and the value is there, then they can plant more. So from when you start until you kind of have a good production, it almost takes 10 years. So it's kind of an ongoing process, yes, but and also a process that the farmers really enjoy. They really like trying new varieties to see if it's actually going to increase the quality of their coffee.
Yeah. Okay. And how about to the barista side? Do you think that baristas have to be educated about the differences between the varieties, like what kind of geisha or Caturra or other varieties? Do you think they're important?
Yeah, I think so. Both for roasters and for baristas. For roasters, because they need to understand what the coffee's potential is. So when you roast it, you know what to kind of look for in terms of flavor. So if you're working with a SL28, you can expect it to be a little bit more fruity than, for instance, a Catuai from the same farm. If you have a geisha, you should expect it to be quite floral. And sometimes it's not, Sometimes geishas can be quite ordinary in flavor.
Okay.
And maybe it's actually not a geisha. Maybe the farmer is misinformed, or you're misinformed. Or maybe it's grown in a place where it doesn't develop these kind of flavors. And also the same with the baristas, if you have a geisha at hand, you should expect it to taste floral, citric, stone fruit, something like that. And sometimes it doesn't, and that might mean it's either roasted too dark. It might mean it's not a very good geisha. It might mean it's not a geisha at all. But I think it's important to educate also consumers about this, so that they kind of know what to expect. For instance, if a customer comes into the store and they want a coffee that is very low in acidity, doesn't have any fruit flavor, then you shouldn't recommend buying a geisha or SL28.
Okay.
So I think flavor and variety is normally quite related, but the problem is a lot of the varieties, they're quite average in flavor, and only on occasion will they be very good in flavor. So and then you have some varieties that are normally quite good in flavor all the time.
Okay, I see. Okay, now we have more and more what we call the new wave of processing, such as anaerobic fermentation, or some form, even adding some additional flavors to the processing. What do you think about that?
I have to say that fermentation is anaerobic by definition. So
yeah, of course.
So to call it anaerobic is kind of saying it twice,
Okay.
But I understand what they mean. And they normally mean very long fermentations, and a lot of times in closed environments. So it's in a metal container or something with a lid on, so there's no oxygen. I personally am not so fan of these kind of flavors, because I think the flavors are quite uninteresting to me. It's always the same, the ferment flavor is the same, whether it's in Brazil or Kenya or Honduras or Ethiopia. The flavor of ferment is almost always the same. And it reminds you of overripe mango, overripe strawberry. Sometimes you can get this kind of olive flavor or boozy flavors like whiskey if it's been fermented for too long. And for me, it's kind of covering up the coffee flavor itself a lot. Having said that, I also think it's a tool that farmers can use in order to increase the value of their coffee. So a very good example that I like to use is a farmer that I used, he's unfortunately not with us anymore, but Gilberto Barahona in El Salvador. He had a volcano with a coffee farm on, and the coffee from the lower part, they were never very interesting in flavor. And he was able to do honey process and naturals, and now they're also doing anaerobic fermentations or long fermentations. And by doing so, they kind of add fruit flavor to the coffee, and they have buyers who are crazy about these coffees, and they're willing to pay a good price for it. Whereas before, when the coffees were boring, they would just sell it for, you know, commercial prices and not make good money on it. So, you know, there's no right or wrong here. I think it's a tool that can be used to increase value on the coffee. But for me, as a coffee buyer and drinker, I'm not so interested in these types of coffees myself.
Okay. So what do you see the relationship among roaster, barista, and farmers, even the processors? What do you see the relationship between them?
I mean, there's so many different types of relationships and ways of working together. But in my case, I personally like to know the people who grow the coffee that I buy. So for me, it's important to visit the farms, see how they work, suggest, you know, improvements together with the farmers, develop with the farmers, develop good quality control so that we can get consistent coffees year after year. And also, you know, what we talked about earlier, plant new varieties and develop the farm into something better. So for me, that's really important. And I think what I can contribute with is knowledge about what the market kind of wants and what's easy for us to sell. And they, of course, can contribute with know-how on processing and varieties and which ones work better in their area and so on. So I think it's good to have a relationship and a dialogue about it. But it's difficult for a barista in a cafe to develop a relationship. I think it's very often the roaster or the green coffee buyer who develops this relationship. But
Okay. So we're talking about following the former question about the relationship. What does COVID-19 change the interaction between the farmers and you? I know the COVID is the pandemic situation is really tough.
Yeah, for me, it's actually been quite easy because I've been buying coffee from the same producers for many years, and we have kind of developed a good system and routine on how we like to do things. So they are very good at what they're doing, and they know what I like and so on. So for us, it's only a matter of communicating. So instead of me going down there, we would communicate through WhatsApp. And the process is normally before they start the harvest, I will be in contact with them, normally by email, and telling them, this year we're looking to maybe increase the amount we buy with 10 to 20 bags. We always offer the minimum same price as we always do. And then we discuss, volumes and what kind of coffees we would like to purchase and how they should be processed. And then during the harvest, we communicate, how is the harvest going? When can we expect to get the samples? And instead of me going to Honduras, for instance, to taste the coffees and select the coffees, last year they would just send the samples to me to Norway, which kind of made my job a lot easier. So for me, it didn't really matter because we're not kind of hunting coffee like a lot of people or green buyers do. We buy from the same people, and they would send me, for instance, the Caballero family sent me, I think 40 or 50 samples. And out of those, we selected maybe 4 different lots of Catuai, and then we had different geisha lots and different other lots. But so they kind of know. And like this week, I've been tasting over 80 samples from Finca Tamana.
Oh, wow.
And based on that, we select what we want to buy and then kind of gather them together and build bigger lots out of that.
Okay. I checked your website. I found that there's still like espresso roast and the filter coffee roast. Do you believe there's an omni roast globally? Do you believe in that? Is it possible?
Yeah, it's possible. To be honest, I could use our filter roast for espresso as well. It's difficult to extract espresso with a traditional espresso machine in general, regardless of roast, I think. Okay. But especially with lighter roast, it's even more difficult. So you need to have really good grinders. You need to tune the machines and really prepare the puck well, and in order to make a good extraction. And even if you do that, you end up with a very high acidity coffee, even if you extract a lot.
Right.
So that's why a lot of people prefer to roast a little bit darker, have a little bit longer development time to kind of get the acidity level a little bit down. Yeah. But we do have customers who use our filter roast for espresso preparation. I mean, espresso it's just coffee and water, just like V60 or it's water and coffee. So why shouldn't it work?
Okay.
But in my experience, most of our cafe customers and restaurant customers, they're normally struggling with extracting enough of their espresso, and that makes the coffee normally taste quite sour. So it makes it a little bit easier to have an espresso roast. But having said that, our espresso roast is really light, so still a lot of people struggle with extracting it well.
Okay, I see. I also noticed that now in your coffee list there are natural processing right now.
Yeah,
I thought there would always be washed coffee for you.
No, we actually had some naturals over the years.
But
it's quite rare that I find naturals that I enjoy drinking. And this particular one is from a farm in Ethiopia that I've been visiting a few times. It's a beautiful farm inside a forest, and I think he's doing a really good job on his naturals. They're very clean. Of course, they have this kind of fermented fruit flavor. But in a good way, in a positive way, I think. But my dream is to also help him set up a little washing station so he can wash some coffee, because like last year, he struggled drying his coffee because of a lot of rain during the harvest. So he was struggling to produce enough natural coffees as well, because it takes more time to dry the naturals.
Okay, I see. Okay, so my final question is that if there's a coffee for you to brew and you only have 3 brewing methods you can choose. The first one is a filter way, like Kalita, Hario, or the other is immersion, like Clever Dripper or French press. And the last one is AeroPress. Which one will you choose and why?
Oh, very difficult question. I think the easiest way is full immersion brews. You almost can't go wrong with it. It's like you set up a cupping; it always tastes delicious. If you make a French press the same way you do a cupping, it's going to taste delicious. It's just it takes a little bit more time, maybe, and more cleanup. So maybe I would prefer AeroPress.
As always. But why?
It's fast, and it makes 1 cup really fast, and it's easy to make. But and you can also do like long immersion brews in an AeroPress.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it's difficult to fail with an AeroPress, the same way it's difficult to fail with immersion. But having said that, every morning at home I make filter coffee. Automatic.
Okay. Okay, sure.
I don't do hand brew at home. I don't have time for that. I just press the button on my filter machine and that's it. So
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, that's all my questions. Thank you so much for your time. And for the last thing, do you have anything to say, Betty, as a friend, or anything else to our company?
Keep up the good work and continue educating Taiwan for better coffee. Hello, everyone.
Okay. Okay, thank you for your time. Thank you.
Hope to see you soon.
Okay, sure. Bye.
Bye.
I see the sun